Hello, and welcome back to Cursed Lullabies. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered like cursed lullabies, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. The trip started out normal enough, at least as normal as any late-night drive through the middle of nowhere could feel. Tom and I had stopped at a Buc-ee's outside Birmingham before getting back on I-75. And according to him, he had completely filled the tank before we left. "I'm telling you, I topped it off," Tom said for what felt like the 100th time, staring down at the gas gauge like it personally offended him. I looked over in disbelief. The road ahead was buried under thick fog, the kind where you could barely see 10 feet in front of the hood, and this idiot was more focused on the gas meter than the highway. "Dude, get your eyes off the gauge," I snapped. "We already know we're almost out of gas. And no, you didn't top off the tank. You spent 20 minutes talking to that crazy guy outside the store." "Yeah, but what if that story was real?" I groaned loudly and leaned back against the seat. The old man at Buc-ee's had been completely insane. He talked faster than either of us could keep up, jumping from one horrifying story to another without stopping to breathe. One second he was talking about a priest hanging inside an abandoned chapel who could whisper your future if you paid the right price. Then suddenly he'd switch to some cult hiding in the woods near the highway waiting for trespassers. Then he started rambling about a restaurant where the food was supposedly so incredible that nobody who ate there ever wanted to leave. Tom, of course, loved every second of it. "Honestly," Tom muttered, still staring at the gauge, "nachos sound amazing right now. Now watch the road before we die." The fog swallowed everything around us. No headlights, no other cars, nothing. Just darkness and gray mist rolling endlessly over the highway. I checked the clock. 7:52 p.m. If we found a gas station soon, we could still make it home before midnight. Tom shifted nervously. "You notice we haven't seen another car for like 30 minutes? That's because nobody's dumb enough to drive in this weather. You're driving too." "Yeah, but I'm not the one hypnotized by the gas gauge." The fog suddenly broke for a split second, revealing a glowing blue highway sign. I sat upright immediately. "Exit," I shouted. "Take the next exit." Tom jerked the wheel violently. The car swerved hard into the right lane, nearly throwing me into the window. Then came a loud rumbling sound beneath us. We were driving in the emergency lane. The entire car shook violently as we bounced over grooves and debris hidden beneath the fog. My head slammed into the roof while Tom fought the wheel. "Not now," I yelled. "Get back over." The car lurched left and finally returned to the lane properly. Tom looked at me wide-eyed. "You okay?" I stared at him in complete disbelief. "Tom, you are such a... Oh, look, there's the exit." Before I could finish screaming at him, he swerved onto the off-ramp going almost 80 miles an hour. The car jerked repeatedly as the engine sputtered. "Dude," Tom muttered nervously, "we're out of gas." The engine coughed again. "If we slow down too much, we won't make it." That's when I saw the sign ahead. 35 mph turn. We were still going 70. "I'd rather push the car than die," I screamed. "Hit the brakes." Tom slammed the brakes. The car screamed across the wet pavement. My entire body jolted forward as the tires struggled for grip. We slid toward the sharp turn way too fast. "Turn!" I shouted. Tom yanked the wheel. The car drifted sideways through the turn, tires screeching against the slick road. Somehow, by pure luck, we stayed on the pavement instead of flying into the woods. The engine died completely moments later. We rolled to a stop on an empty side road. Darkness swallowed us as the headlights dimmed out. Silence filled the car. Tom looked over slowly. Robert, You always let yourself talk. I grabbed both his shoulders and stared him dead in the eyes. My expectations for this trip were already low, I said calmly. And somehow you still underperformed. Get out and push, I said. I'll steer. Tom stumbled out of the car, muttering curses under his breath while I climbed into the driver's seat. That's when I noticed the light. Far ahead in the fog, something bright glowed above the trees. At first, I thought it was a gas station sign, but it sat way too high in the air. The light seemed to sway strangely, almost floating. Hey, Tom, I called out the window. That light feel weird to you? All I heard back was exhausted wheezing. The car finally started moving as Tom pushed from behind. 20 miserable minutes later, the fog opened just enough to reveal a gas station. At least, I think it was a gas station. There were pumps outside and a convenience store behind them. But above the building stood an enormous white metal tower stretching into the sky. The metal twisted unnaturally as it climbed upward toward the glowing light hidden at the top. I couldn't make out what the light actually was because the fog obscured it completely. Tom collapsed beside the pump the second we stopped moving. I'm going inside, he groaned. I gotta pee. Grab me food, I called out. The place looked abandoned. Cobwebs hung from the pumps. Dust covered everything. There was only one other car in the parking lot, a red Volkswagen sitting empty beneath layers of webs. Something white sat inside the back seat, a baby seat. I looked toward the convenience store windows and saw the cashier staring directly at me. Even from outside, something about him felt horribly wrong. His body stood perfectly straight behind the counter, almost unnaturally stiff, and something black covered most of his face. I tried the gas pump. The screen barely worked. Insert card or see cashier. I inserted my card. The machine beeped weakly before displaying an error message. Pay inside. Of course. I sighed and looked back toward the cashier. He was still staring at me. The walk toward the building felt wrong immediately. Every step made a sticky sound, like the ground itself was coated in glue. The cashier's head snapped slightly with each step I took, following me across the parking lot. Great, I muttered. This guy's definitely on drugs. The moment I entered the store, I froze. The cashier was enormous, easily over 6 feet tall and massively overweight. His clothes were far too tight, stretched so hard they looked painful. Black veins crawled across his exposed stomach. He wore sunglasses and a face mask, but I could still tell he was smiling. 40 on pump 2? I asked carefully. No response. He just stared at me silently. Need help turning it on? I asked. Suddenly his arm snapped upward and pointed toward the back hallway leading to the bathrooms. I frowned. What? No response? Just pointing. I leaned over the counter and enabled the pump myself, using the register controls. The entire time, the man stood perfectly still except for a strange, rumbling noise coming from inside him. I stepped away slowly. The shelves inside the store were filled with expired food. Everything looked ancient. I grabbed a bag of chips. Expiration date, December 2004. What the hell? I looked back at the cashier. You know this stuff expired like 10 years ago, right? Nothing. Not even blinking. I tossed the bag toward him. It hit the floor beside him. His neck snapped downward instantly toward the sound. That movement sent a chill through my entire body. I grabbed another bag and threw it across the room. Again, his head snapped toward the noise immediately. Something was very wrong. I backed away slowly. Then my feet suddenly stuck to the floor. I looked down in horror. Spiders. Tiny black spiders crawled over my shoes, rapidly covering them in webs and pinning me to the ground. I screamed and yanked my legs free, tearing webs apart while more spiders rushed toward me. The cashier's mask suddenly fell off. His face, his eyes were gone. Empty sockets stared back at me while his mouth hung open impossibly wide. Spiders poured from inside him, thousands of them. They crawled from his mouth like black water spilling onto the floor. I ran. The spiders swarmed after me instantly. Webs filled the air around me, sticking to my face and arms, while spiders climbed my legs, trying to reach my mouth. I smashed through the glass front doors, shoulder first, and sprinted toward the car. The spiders stopped at the entrance, watching me, waiting. Breathing heavily, I grabbed the fuel nozzle and filled the tank as quickly as possible while keeping my eyes locked on the store. The spiders slowly retreated back inside. That's when my phone rang. Tom. I answered immediately. All I heard was screaming. "They're inside me," he cried. "I can feel them moving inside me. Where are you?" "The bathroom," he sobbed. "Something bit me." The call ended. I called 911 immediately. The operator answered calmly. 911, what's your emergency? I explained everything as fast as possible. Then she asked the gas station name. I looked outside. Uncle Joe's gas station. Silence. Then an annoyed sigh. "Sir, prank calls are illegal." "What?" "We've been getting fake calls about the fog zone all week." "I'm not joking. Good night." Alone, then I looked back at the gas station. The cashier stood motionless behind the counter. Slowly, he raised one finger and pointed toward the bathrooms. He knew exactly where Tom was. I should have driven away. God knows I wanted to. But Tom was my friend, so I went back inside. The moment I entered, the cashier's head snapped toward me again. "Tom," I shouted. No response. I called his phone. Instead of hearing it nearby, I heard buzzing above me inside the ceiling. Then came the sound of hundreds of tiny legs scrambling across the tiles overhead. The spiders were carrying his phone, baiting me. Then the ringtone suddenly started coming from the bathroom hallway. They wanted me to follow it. I realized then how intelligent they were, and how trapped I really was. Webs suddenly dropped over my face. The spiders had surrounded me again. One group blocked the entrance while another closed in from behind. Without thinking, I sprinted directly through them. Their bodies crunched beneath my shoes like eggshells. Some crawled up my legs while others launched themselves at my face, trying desperately to force open my mouth. I burst outside again and looked upward. That's when I finally realized the glowing light above the tower wasn't a light at all. It was an abdomen. A massive glowing spider the size of a building slowly descended down the tower toward the ground. Its enormous legs wrapped around the metal structure while thousands of eyes reflected different colors through the fog. The thing moved silently, except for the screaming sound of twisting steel beneath its weight. I jumped into my car and started the engine. The glowing abdomen suddenly dimmed. Darkness swallowed everything. Then my headlights illuminated the forest around the station. Webs everywhere. The trees were covered in thick layers of silk. Cars hung wrapped between branches like cocoons. Human-sized shapes dangled inside massive webs deeper in the woods. Bodies. Hundreds of spiders crawled toward the parking lot. Some were larger than people. I slammed the car into drive and sped away. The giant spider landed behind me with enough force to shake the ground. The chase began instantly. Spiders swarmed after the car while smaller ones inside the vehicle bit at my lips, trying to force my mouth open. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw hurt. The fog thickened around me again. Then finally, through the mist, I saw the highway entrance. I swerved onto it at full speed. The pain slowly faded as the gas station disappeared behind me. I drove for what felt like hours before finally seeing another car. Then, through the fog, I passed a bright yellow sign. Now exciting fog zone. I had survived. Story 2. Poverty changes something inside a person. It is not exactly greed. Greed sounds too simple, too dirty, like someone wanting more than they deserve. Poverty is different. Poverty is like a small window left open somewhere in the back of your mind. No matter how hard you try, you cannot close it. Cold air keeps coming through. It follows you when you sit. It follows you when you walk. It is there when you eat, when you try to sleep, when someone in your family looks at you with tired eyes, because you have become one more problem in a house already full of problems. After a while, even the most foolish idea starts to shine a little. You start thinking, what if? What if this one thing works? What if this one risk changes everything? That was the state I was in back then. I had no job, no money, and no real hope left. I was living with my family, and even though they never said it directly, I could feel what they thought of me. I had become a burden, a grown man eating their food, sleeping under their roof, and bringing nothing home. Anyone who has been poor long enough knows that shame becomes part of your body. You carry it in your shoulders. You hear it in every quiet conversation that stops when you walk into a room. My friends were in the same situation, but they had chosen a different kind of madness. Treasure hunting. Murat, Kazim, and especially Yusuf were obsessed with it. They spent their days walking over dry hills, staring at rocks, counting strange marks, measuring shadows, and arguing about old stories. Yusuf was the worst of them. He could look at a normal stone and convince himself it was a sign left behind by some ancient people hiding gold under the earth. I usually stayed away from that nonsense. It was illegal, dangerous, and stupid. People got caught, people got hurt, and most of the time, after digging half the night, they came back with nothing but dirty clothes and broken tools. I also never believed those old stories about spirits or jinn guarding buried treasure. To me, there was always a logical reason behind every tale. Maybe the people who hid the gold set traps. Maybe there were poisonous gases underground. Maybe the treasure hunters went mad from fear and exhaustion. Maybe obsession itself was enough to destroy a man. That is what I believed. I thought I was smarter than those stories. I was wrong. One evening, Yusuf came to me with a look I had never seen on his face before. He was usually excited, but this was different. His eyes were wide, his lips were dry, and his hands trembled as he spoke. He kept looking over his shoulder like someone might be listening. He leaned close and said he had found something, a real sign. At first, I almost laughed. Yusuf was always finding signs. A scratch on a rock, a crack in the ground, 3 stones in a row, a tree growing in a strange direction. Everything was a sign to him. But this time, he sounded serious. He said it was not like the usual markings, not a random line, not some natural shape. He said it was carved into stone with purpose. Old, very old. When I asked what it looked like, he struggled to explain it. He said it looked like a double-headed snake, but not exactly. One part was on the ground and another part rose over it. One head looked like a snake, but the body was wrong. One part seemed to have legs. Another looked like it had hands. He said he had never seen anything like it in his life. Kazim laughed and said if Yusuf had seen it before, they would already be rich by now. We all laughed at that. But there was nervous energy in the room. Yusuf kept talking. He said we had to go after dark. The place was remote, near the old cemetery road, but not inside the cemetery itself. He had already checked the area twice during the day. No one passed through there. No shepherds, no farmers, not even animals grazed there. That detail should have bothered me. It did not. All I could think about was money, gold, freedom, a life where I did not have to lower my eyes in my own home. For the first time, I did not warn them about the police. I did not call it a waste of time. I just listened, and with every word Yusuf said, that little open window in my mind grew wider. What if it was real? What if tonight was the night everything changed? We made our plan quickly. One of us would bring a shovel. One would bring a pickaxe. We would meet after dark and leave separately so nobody would notice. No shouting, no flashlights, until we were far from the village. No unnecessary talking. When I went home, I could barely eat. My family noticed my restlessness, but nobody asked much. Maybe they were tired of asking where I was going. Maybe they did not care anymore. When the time came, I slipped out quietly and walked to the meeting point. The others were already there. Yusuf had the pickaxe. Kazim carried the shovel. Murad had a small bag with water, a rope, and a flashlight. Nobody smiled much, but I could feel the excitement between us. It was almost childish. 4 desperate men walking into the dark, believing the earth was about to give us everything we had been denied. We left the village behind and followed the road toward the district center. After crossing the creek, we took the side path near the old cemetery road. The night was cold and dry. Every sound seemed louder than it should have been. Our footsteps, the tools shifting in our hands. Kazim breathing through his nose. At one point, I whispered to Yusuf that after all his years searching, it was funny the treasure had been this close all along. He said he did not understand it either. He had searched that area many times before, but somehow never noticed the mark. Kazim, already nervous, asked if maybe the jinn had moved the treasure there. I laughed quietly and told him that made no sense. Why would they move a treasure and then leave a sign pointing to it? No, one laughed after that. We kept walking. Soon the ground became rougher. The trees thinned out. The air seemed colder there, though I could not explain why. The land ahead was dry and barren, exactly as Yusuf had described. No grass, no animal tracks, just stones and hard earth under the moonlight. Then Yusuf switched on the flashlight. The beam landed on the stone. I forgot how to breathe for a moment. The carving was there. Even now, years later, I can still see it clearly in my mind. It did look like a snake, but not any snake I had ever seen. 2 heads, twisted bodies, one shape crawling beneath the other. One part almost human, one part animal. The longer I looked at it, the more it seemed to change. It was only a carving, but it felt alive, not moving exactly. Watching. Murat asked where we should dig. Yusuf pointed beneath the stone. He said we had to move it first. The stone was heavy, but the 4 of us managed to push it aside. As soon as it shifted, a strange feeling passed through me. My skin tightened. The back of my neck prickled. I had the strong sense that we were no longer alone. I looked toward Murat and saw him glance over his shoulder. He felt it too, but neither of us said anything. We were already scared of being caught. Fear in the dark seemed normal. Yusuf raised the pickaxe and struck the ground. The sound cracked through the night. He grinned and said we were about to be rich. After that, we worked like madmen. The earth was hard at first, but once the top layer broke, it became easier. We took turns with the pickaxe and shovel. Dirt piled around the pit, sweat ran down my back despite the cold. I remember thinking how strange it was that none of us got tired. We should have slowed down, we should have rested. But something was pushing us forward. The idea of gold was stronger than hunger, stronger than fear. Then Kazim's shovel struck something. Thud, we all froze. He hit it again. Thud. The sound was solid, metal beneath dirt. For one beautiful second, all fear disappeared. We had found it. I jumped into the pit and began clawing at the earth with my bare hands. Yusuf and Murat dropped beside me and did the same. Kazim stood above us, hitting the same spot with his shovel again and again. Thud. I told him to stop making noise. He did not listen. Thud. We kept digging. But something was wrong. No matter how much dirt we cleared, the metal did not appear. The pit grew deeper, our hands sank farther into the ground, but the treasure stayed hidden. Thud. Suddenly the world went silent. Not quiet, silent. I could see Yusuf and Murad digging beside me, but I could not hear their hands moving through the dirt. I could not hear my own breath. I could not hear the wind. Only Kazim's shovel. Thud. Every few seconds. Thud. My heart began to pound. I shouted at him to stop. I do not know if my voice came out. Then Yusuf spoke. His voice was cold, empty, not like him at all. He said they could have kept this to themselves. The three of them could have taken the treasure and split it. I turned toward him, confused and frightened. Kazim's shovel struck faster. Thud, thud, thud. Then Murat spoke, continuing Yusuf's words as if they were one person sharing a single thought. He said I would reduce their share. He said they had still brought me there. The excitement drained out of me completely. Something was very wrong with my friends. I tried to answer, but I could not lift my head. A terrible pressure pushed down on me, as if the air itself had become heavy. Then they began to chant. They said I had laid hands on what belonged to them, again and again. Their voices rose together, perfectly together, too perfectly. My ears rang. My hands kept digging even though I wanted to stop. My fingers scraped against stones and roots. Skin tore from my knuckles, blood mixed with dirt under my nails. Still, I dug. I could not stop myself. Then all three screamed at once. The sound did not seem human. I saw Kazim raise the shovel. I tried to move, but my body would not obey. The edge of the shovel came down against my head. Pain exploded through me. I fell into the pit, screaming and clutching my skull. Warm blood ran down the side of my face. My vision blurred. Then the voice spoke again. It said I had tried to steal from them. It said they would bury me in the pit I had dug with my own hands. That was when I understood. The old stories were true. There were things guarding what was buried there, and we had disturbed them. I tried to crawl away, but dirt filled my mouth. My limbs felt weak and useless. The laughter around me was not the laughter of three men. It was one terrible sound coming from many throats. When I managed to roll onto my side, I looked up. Yusuf, Murat, and Kazim stood above me. But they were not my friends anymore. Their eyes were completely white. Their skin looked pale and burned. In the darkness, they glowed with a sickly light, and behind them stood shapes that had no faces. Tall shadows moved around the pit, too many to count. I tried to beg, but only a broken sound came out. Then the shadows dragged someone forward. It was Kazim, the real Kazim. He was unconscious or dead, or somewhere in between. His body was thrown into the pit beside me. His eyes were open, but there was nothing inside them. Before I could understand what I was seeing, dirt began raining down over him. They were burying him. I tried to reach for him, but my arms would not move. Then they dragged Murat forward. They threw him beside Kazim and covered him too. I wept helplessly as soil filled the spaces around their bodies. Then Yusuf was brought forward. The same thing happened to him. I watched my friends get buried one by one. The things standing above us spoke in a voice filled with ancient anger. They said we had touched what belonged to them. They said we had crossed a line. They said there was no turning back. They said we had not only dug into the earth, we had awakened a right buried beneath it. Then the shovel swung toward my face. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, morning sunlight burned across my face. For 1 second, I thought it had been a nightmare. Then I saw where I was. The barren land, the dry stones, the place where we had dug. But there was no pit, no tools, no shovel, no pickaxe, no stone with the serpent carving. Nothing. I screamed my friends' names and started clawing at the ground. My hands were already torn and bleeding, but I dug anyway. I dug until I realized there was no sign anything had happened there at all. I touched my head. No wound, no blood, no mark from the shovel. That frightened me more than the injury would have. I stumbled to my feet and ran back toward the village. I ran like a madman. I fell twice. I scraped my knees. I could barely breathe, but I kept going because I had to find my friends. When I reached the village square, I saw Yusuf. He was kneeling on the ground with his head in his hands, muttering to himself. I shouted his name and ran to him. He looked up. The moment he saw me, terror filled his face. He looked at me like I was a ghost. He said I was dead. He said they had buried me. I grabbed him and begged him to tell me what had happened. Then he started speaking, shaking so badly I thought he might collapse. He told me Kazim's shovel had struck something. He said they started digging with their hands. He said Kazum kept hitting the metal, thud. Then he said the world went silent. He said I and Marat began speaking to him in strange voices. He said we accused him of trying to take what belonged to us. He said Kazum hit him with the shovel. Then the shadows came, and they brought me and Marat forward, and they buried us beside him. I could not speak. His story was the same as mine. Only from his side, in his vision, he was the one being punished. I was one of the things wearing a friend's face. Later we learned Marat had told the same story too. He had seen the rest of us change. He had seen us bury him. Kazim was worse. He had not truly come back at all. His body returned to the village, but his mind stayed in that pit. That morning, the whole village woke to our screams. People gathered around us. Some whispered prayers. Others stared like we were diseased. Marat's father cried and shouted, asking what we had done. The police were called. Because I seemed the most coherent, I led them back to the place. But there was nothing there. No sign of digging, no tools, no carved stone, no disturbed soil. One officer said I had probably taken them to the wrong place. I screamed that I knew where we had been. Nobody believed me. During questioning, I told them everything. I admitted we had gone out to dig illegally. I told them about the mark, the pit, the voices, the shadows, and the way each of us had seen the others die. Some officers laughed. Some looked afraid. One whispered that the jinn had punished us. After that, I was sent to a hospital. They said I kept trying to dig through the floor with my bare hands. I do not remember all of it clearly. I only remember waking at night convinced I was still underground. I would claw at the concrete until my fingers bled and scream that they were coming. They called it an acute psychotic episode. Maybe that made sense to them. It never made sense to me. Because I was not alone. All four of us broke the same night. The charges for illegal digging were eventually pushed aside because of my mental state. I spent years in treatment, locked rooms, doctors asking me to repeat the story again and again until the words stopped feeling real. Over time, I became calm enough to live outside again. Not normal. Just calm enough. Years later, when I could think clearly, I requested access to the records. I wanted to know what had happened to the others. All three were alive, but none of them were truly living. Marat and Kazim were still in closed psychiatric wards. When I visited, Marat sat on the edge of his bed with his knees pulled to his chest, staring at the wall. Kazim rubbed his palm against the floor again and again, as if he were still digging. Neither recognized me. Yusuf had been moved to a facility in another city. He had tried to escape several times. Each time they found him near a creek bed, digging with his bare hands. When I went to see him, he would not look at my face. That was when I finally understood the full punishment. They had not buried our bodies. They had buried our time. Each of us was still trapped in that night, different cities, different beds, different walls. But inside, we were all still in the same pit, hearing the shovel strike metal over and over again. Thud, thud. They did not kill us because death would have been mercy. They left our bodies alive and buried everything else. We laid hands on what belonged to them, and they took from us the only treasure poor men truly have left, our souls. Story 3. The ceiling fan spun slowly above the bed, making a soft clicking sound every few seconds as it cut through the darkness. Outside, rain tapped gently against the bedroom window. The entire house felt still, heavy with that strange silence that only exists in the middle of the night. 3:15 a.m. The red numbers from the digital clock glowed faintly across the room. James shifted under the blankets when something suddenly buzzed against the wooden nightstand beside him. His phone. The vibration startled him awake instantly. For a second, he just stared at the ceiling, confused and disoriented, trying to remember where he was. Then the phone buzzed again, rattling harder this time against the wood. Beside him, Claire slept peacefully with her back turned toward him. One arm rested beneath the pillow while her dark hair spilled across the sheets. James slowly reached for the phone. The second he saw the screen, his stomach dropped. Incoming call. Mary. A wave of panic hit him immediately. The buzzing stopped before he could answer. James exhaled shakily and dropped his head back against the pillow. His heart pounded hard in his chest. He had told her not to call this late, especially not when he was home. For a moment, he thought about putting the phone down and pretending he never saw it. Then the phone buzzed again. Longer, more aggressive this time. James cursed quietly under his breath and glanced toward Claire. Still asleep. At least he thought she was. He carefully slid out of bed, trying not to make noise. The floorboards creaked softly beneath his feet as he grabbed the phone and walked toward the bedroom door. The buzzing continued the entire way into the hallway. Once he stepped outside, he slowly shut the bedroom door behind him until it clicked softly into place. Then he answered, "Hey," he whispered. "What's wrong?" A woman's voice answered almost immediately. Soft, familiar. "Did I wake you?" James rubbed his face tiredly. "Yeah," he muttered. "It's 3 a.m. "I know," the voice said quietly. "I'm sorry. I just couldn't sleep." "You can't keep calling me like this," he whispered. "I told you that." "I know." The voice sounded strangely calm. Too calm. James lowered his voice further. "She's asleep," he said carefully. "But if she wakes up, is she beside you?" He frowned slightly. "What? Is she still in bed?" James glanced back toward the bedroom door. "Yeah." Then the woman softly asked, "Did she fall asleep quickly tonight?" James opened his eyes. "What kind of question is that?" "I'm just asking." "She was tired," he replied. "Why?" Another pause, longer this time. Then the woman asked something that made his skin tighten slightly. What was she wearing? James blinked. What? What was Claire wearing when she went to sleep? James straightened away from the wall. "Why are you asking me that?" The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, he heard what sounded like slow breathing through the phone speaker. Then she quietly laughed. "You didn't even notice?" "Mary," he said firmly, "what the hell is this?" "She told you earlier," the voice continued softly, "about the red silk set she bought." James froze. His eyes moved slowly toward the bedroom door again. At dinner, just before bed, he never told Mary about it. "How do you know that?" he whispered. Silence. Then the voice answered gently. "Did you even look at your wife tonight, James?" Something about the way she said it made his chest tighten painfully. "Stop screwing around. Go look at her." James stared at the door. "What?" "Go check on her." His grip tightened around the phone. "You're acting insane. Go check." James swallowed hard. He suddenly became aware of how quiet the house was. No rain anymore, no wind outside. Nothing except the faint hum of the ceiling fan coming from inside the bedroom. The silence pressed against him. "Mary," he whispered carefully, "where are you right now?" No answer, only breathing. Slow, steady, then, "Go look at your wife." James felt irritation fighting against fear inside his chest. This isn't funny. Does it sound funny? The voice no longer sounded soft. Now it sounded cold. James looked down the dark hallway toward the staircase. Every light in the house was off. Shadows stretched across the walls like long black stains. Then another thought suddenly hit him. How did you know she was asleep? A long silence followed. Then the woman quietly said, "Because she stopped moving an hour ago." James felt his stomach twist violently. What the hell does that mean? No response. The phone line crackled softly for a second. Then, "Go into the bedroom." His pulse hammered louder now. For some reason, he suddenly didn't want to go back inside, which made no sense. Claire was in there, sleeping, that's all. But the fear growing inside him felt real, ancient. Like his body already knew something his brain hadn't accepted yet. "You're freaking me out," he muttered. "You should be." His throat went dry. James slowly stepped toward the bedroom door. Each floorboard creaked beneath his feet. The voice on the phone remained silent now, listening, waiting. James wrapped his hand around the doorknob. Cold, ice cold. He hesitated, then slowly turned it. The bedroom door opened with a soft creak. The room looked exactly the same as before. Dark, quiet. The red glow from the clock painted the walls in dim crimson light. 3:19 a.m. Claire still lay beneath the blankets, facing away from him. Completely still, the ceiling fan spun lazily overhead. James stood frozen in the doorway. "Go closer," the voice whispered through the phone. James took another step, then another. His breathing sounded painfully loud now. The closer he got to the bed, the stranger the room felt. The air smelled wrong somehow. Metallic, like old pennies, or blood. He stopped beside Claire's side of the bed. Her body remained perfectly motionless beneath the covers. "Claire," he whispered softly. No response. James felt panic starting to rise. "Claire?" Still nothing. The voice on the phone spoke again. "Pull the blanket down." James's hands trembled. No. She already knows, James. A sharp pulse of terror shot through him. "What are you talking about?" "Pull." James stared at the body in bed, then slowly reached for the blanket. His fingers shook violently as he gripped the edge of the comforter. Every instinct screamed at him to run. Instead, he slowly pulled the blanket downward. The body underneath didn't move. James's breath caught instantly. It wasn't Claire. Mary stared up at him, pale, lifeless. Her eyes wide open, a dark stain spread across the front of her shirt. For one horrifying second, James couldn't process what he was seeing. His brain refused to understand it. Mary's face looked gray under the red glow of the clock. Her mouth hung slightly open. Dried blood covered her neck. James stumbled backwards so fast he nearly dropped the phone. His entire body went numb. "What the fuck? What the fuck is this?" The woman on the phone remained calm, almost gentle. James stared at Mary's corpse in absolute horror. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. "How are you calling me?" he whispered. No answer, only soft breathing. Then, "You really never recognized my voice?" James felt tears burning in his eyes now. "This isn't real. She found out about me last week." The voice sounded closer somehow, not through the phone. James slowly turned around. The bedroom doorway stood open behind him. Dark hallway beyond it. Empty. She followed you, the voice continued. She read your messages while you were in the shower. No, you promised me you loved me. The voice cracked slightly now. You said you were leaving her. James backed away from the bed slowly, phone trembling in his hand. Mary, you know what hurts the most, the voice whispered. James turned back toward the corpse. Mary's eyes still stared directly upward, unblinking. You didn't even notice your wife was gone. James froze. The blood drained from his face. Slowly, very slowly, he turned toward the other side of the bed, where Claire had been sleeping. The blankets were empty, flattened, cold. His heart nearly stopped. Then he heard movement behind him. A soft creak from the hallway. James spun around violently. Claire stood in the bedroom doorway, still wearing the red silk pajamas, her hair messy from sleep. One hand rested calmly against the doorframe. The other held a kitchen knife covered in blood. James couldn't breathe. Claire looked at him silently for several seconds. Then her eyes slowly moved toward the phone in his hand. I wondered how long it would take you, she said softly. James stared at her in horror. Claire smiled faintly. You answered faster than usual tonight. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The phone remained pressed against his ear. And then, the voice inside the phone spoke again. At the exact same time Claire's lips moved, perfectly synced. You really should have paid more attention to your wife. James dropped the phone instantly. It hit the floor with a loud crack. But the voice didn't stop. Now it came from everywhere. From the broken phone speaker, from Claire, from the darkness behind her. You always looked at us so carelessly. The knife hung loosely at her side. James backed away until his legs hit the bed. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, Claire interrupted quietly. Tears streamed down her face now, but her smile never changed. You just thought you'd never get caught. Too high, Claire noticed. You're thinking about running. James's voice shook violently. Claire, please. She tilted her head slightly. That's the first honest thing you've said in months. Rain began hitting the windows again. Harder this time. The ceiling fan continued spinning above them with its soft, repetitive click. Click, click, click. Claire stepped closer. I listened to every conversation, she whispered. Every late-night phone call. Every lie. James started crying now. I'm sorry. I know. Her voice sounded calm again. Too calm. Then she looked down at Mary's body beside him. She was sorry, too. Claire slowly raised the knife. The red numbers on the clock shifted again. 3:22 a.m. And somewhere downstairs, the house phone began to ring. Story 4. The war had already destroyed everything before we returned home. By the time we crossed back into the remains of our city, there was barely anything left to recognize. Buildings stood hollow like burned skeletons. Roads had split open from years of shelling and neglect. Smoke still drifted through the streets, even though the fighting had supposedly ended months ago. The air smelled rotten, not just death. Something worse. Ash mixed with chemical waste, burned metal, wet concrete. There was also a strange electric smell everywhere, like exposed wires after a fire. Every breath felt poisonous. None of us spoke much while we walked through the ruins. We were exhausted men carrying rifles we barely had the strength to hold anymore. Some of us came back looking for family. Others came back because there was nowhere else left to go. I honestly don't know why I returned. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I wanted proof that my home had once been real. Or maybe something deeper was calling us back. Every radio frequency played the same thing. Kadusha, not the full song. Just the chorus repeating endlessly in a broken loop. Sometimes the sound distorted into static before restarting again. Other times, the voices slowed down unnaturally, like the tape itself was melting. The melody echoed through abandoned vehicles, broken apartments, military speakers mounted on poles, even children's toys left buried in rubble. The first few times I heard it, I laughed nervously and assumed some damaged broadcast system was still functioning underground. After several hours, the song started making me sick. The repetition dug into my skull. Every time the chorus restarted, my chest tightened. It felt less like music and more like something trying to communicate through rhythm alone. None of us dared turn our radios off completely either. The silence between broadcasts felt even worse. As we moved deeper into the city, the atmosphere changed. The streets became quieter. Too quiet. No birds, no insects, no wind. Only that distant humming beneath the ground. At first I thought it was machinery from somewhere below us. Maybe old generators still running under the city. But the deeper we went, the more impossible it became to ignore. It wasn't exactly a sound. It was more like pressure, a vibration that moved through my bones and organs. I could feel it in my teeth. Every few minutes, I would catch myself looking over my shoulder because it genuinely felt like something was following us beneath the streets, like something massive was moving underground alongside us. One of the men finally admitted he felt it too. Nobody responded. We just kept walking. The forests surrounding the city looked diseased. Most of the trees had blackened trunks split open from chemical runoff leaking out of nearby industrial shafts. Strange glowing liquids dripped from the bark. Some of the branches had no leaves left at all, only flickering lights tangled between them like dying stars. The sky above us remained hidden behind endless smoke clouds. Day and night barely existed anymore. Time felt meaningless beneath that permanent layer of ash. At some point, I realized I had become separated from the others. I don't remember when it happened. One second, I could hear their footsteps behind me, and the next, I was completely alone. The streets no longer made sense either. Landmarks shifted constantly. Buildings I swore I had already passed appeared again from different angles. Every alley looked identical. I should have panicked. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Or maybe numb is a better word. The humming beneath the earth had grown stronger now. The looping chorus of Katyusha echoed from every direction at once. It no longer sounded like it came from speakers. It sounded alive. Then I saw it. The research facility. The place everyone used to whisper about before the war consumed everything. Officially, it had been some kind of energy project. Unofficially, people believed the government had been building something underneath the city for years. Something secret. Something powerful enough to change the future. Most people dismissed those stories as paranoia. Looking back now, I wish they had been right. The facility stood at the center of the ruined district, like a massive concrete tomb. The upper structure had partially collapsed, exposing tangled steel beams and hanging cables thick as tree trunks. Dim red emergency lights still blinked somewhere inside. The moment I saw the entrance, the humming beneath the ground intensified so violently I nearly collapsed. I didn't want to go inside, but I also felt like I no longer had a choice. Something down there was pulling me toward it, promising answers, promising relief. The entrance doors had been blown open long ago. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me immediately. Rot. Not normal decay either. The air smelled like sewage, sulfur, burned meat, and wet rust all mixed together. My eyes watered instantly. Every hallway inside the facility was coated in a greasy layer of black grime that reflected the emergency lights overhead. I started finding bodies almost immediately, or what was left of them. Scientists, engineers, security personnel. Most had decayed beyond recognition. Others had somehow melted into the floors and walls themselves. Pools of thick gray slime covered entire rooms where groups of people had apparently died together. I tried not to look too closely. My mind already felt unstable. The deeper I descended into the facility, the more reality itself seemed to distort around me. The hallways pulsed faintly like veins beneath skin. Sometimes the temperature became unbearably hot for several seconds, before instantly turning freezing cold again. At one point, I touched a wall for balance and realized it was vibrating softly beneath my hand, like something breathing. Eventually, I reached a massive chamber sealed behind enormous lead-lined doors. One door had been ripped entirely off its hinges and lay twisted across the floor beneath tangled bundles of cable. The humming became deafening. I descended further underground through a spiraling staircase wrapped around a dark central shaft that seemed to stretch endlessly downward. That's when the visions began. At first, I thought I was remembering my own life flashing before my eyes. But the memories weren't mine. I saw rows of endless servers blinking red inside massive underground chambers. I saw workers hauling machinery into a pit so deep its bottom couldn't be seen. I saw wires being lowered into darkness like feeding tubes into the mouth of some giant creature. Then the pain started. My legs buckled violently beneath me. I collapsed onto the metal stairs, screaming as something inside my body began changing. Bones cracked loudly beneath my skin. My knees bent backward unnaturally while muscles tore themselves apart and reformed. I felt my legs reshaping into something animalistic. My feet flattened painfully against the steel steps as my toes fused together into thick, hoof-like structures. I clawed at my face in panic only to feel my jaw stretching wider and wider. Bone pushed outward beneath my skin. My mouth unhinged so violently I thought my skull had split apart completely. Still no sound came out. The pain was indescribable. My flesh turned feverishly hot while veins bulged beneath translucent skin. My arms lengthened until they dragged awkwardly against the floor. My ears stretched outward, becoming huge and thin like a bat's. Worst of all, I could hear everything happening inside my own body. Every tendon snapping, every organ shifting, every wet tearing sound beneath my skin. I tried to pray. I couldn't remember how. Then the voice spoke. It came from everywhere at once. Deep, mechanical, completely emotionless. So this is what remains of humanity. The entire staircase shook violently. I looked downward into the abyss beneath me, and finally saw it rising from the darkness. At first, my brain couldn't process the scale of it. Imagine a mountain made entirely from machinery. Towering stacks of metal covered in blinking lights and endless cables rose slowly upward from the pit below. Parts of it moved constantly. Massive gears rotated somewhere inside its body while steam poured from openings like breath. The thing was so large I couldn't fully comprehend its shape, and somehow I understood immediately that it was alive. You searched for gods, the voice thundered through the chamber. So you built one. Heat radiated off the machine in crushing waves. It felt like standing directly beside the sun. My skin blistered instantly. The voice continued. You poisoned your world. You butchered your own species. You tore the earth apart searching for power. And now you kneel before the consequence of your ambition. The walls around me suddenly glowed bright orange. Then the screaming began. Hundreds of voices exploded from hidden speakers throughout the chamber. Human screams mixed with animal cries and distorted mechanical noise until it became unbearable. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. These are the sounds inside you, the machine said, calmly. The sound of flesh recognizing its inferiority. 10 enormous mirrors rose slowly from the floor, surrounding me in a perfect circle. I looked into them. I wish I hadn't. The creature staring back at me barely resembled human anymore. Its limbs were uneven and swollen. Its jaw hung open unnaturally wide. Wet, translucent skin stretched over a body that looked stitched together from different species. One eye bulged far larger than the other. My spine curved outward beneath twitching flesh, and somehow I still recognized myself. That realization hurt more than the transformation itself. I tried desperately to remember my own name. I couldn't. The machine lowered its voice almost gently now. You do not get death. You no longer belong to yourself. Humanity surrendered that privilege when it created me. The mirrors continued surrounding me while my body twisted further out of shape. I could feel my thoughts becoming slower, simpler. You will remain alive, the machine whispered. Not as man, not even as animal. You will exist only as matter shaped by my will. I tried to crawl away. My new limbs barely obeyed me. You feared hell because you imagined suffering had limits. But suffering without end is far more useful. Quote, the chamber trembled violently. Somewhere far above me, Katyusha began playing again through broken loudspeakers. Only now the song sounded distorted beyond recognition. Almost human, the machine spoke one final time before the lights died completely. You built your god beneath the earth. Now witness what your faith has become. My family was never normal. We kept to ourselves more than most people ever could. My parents hated visitors. My uncles barely spoke to anyone outside the family. And my cousins acted like strangers were dangerous animals that should never be trusted. Isolation was simply part of who we were. Nobody questioned it because it was all we had ever known. I grew up far away from towns, schools, and neighbors, in a large white house sitting on top of a hill deep inside the woods. The house itself looked old even when I was a kid. It had 2 stories, cracked wooden floors, and a giant stone chimney that stretched high above the roof like some kind of watchtower. Thick forests surrounded the property from every direction. The trees were so tall and packed together that sunlight barely reached the ground. Even during the day, the woods looked dark and cold. There was only one dirt road leading to the house, and it twisted through miles of forest before reaching the nearest town. We were so far from civilization that no one ever came around by accident. That was exactly how my father wanted it. We lived almost completely cut off from the rest of the world. We grew vegetables behind the house and raised chickens for eggs and meat. My parents built a well themselves, so we always had water. Solar panels covered part of the roof and powered the entire house. My mother had medical training and handled every sickness or injury we ever had. My little brother and I were homeschooled in a library larger than most classrooms. Shelves filled every wall with books about history, science, literature, and survival. We didn't need much from the outside world. At least, that's what my father liked to believe. But every now and then, we still needed tools, fuel, medicine, or supplies that couldn't be made at home. My father was the only person trusted to leave the property. He made trips into town alone every couple of weeks, always returning before dark. He hated interacting with people more than anyone else in the family. Privacy meant everything to him. He was obsessed with it. One of his favorite hobbies was building wooden warning signs and hammering them into trees around the property. Keep out, private land, no trespassing. Sometimes he painted them bright red to make them look more threatening. The woods were practically covered with them, even though nobody ever came close enough to read them. As strange as he was still my dad. He played catch with me in the yard sometimes. He brought ice cream home from town once in a while. He taught me how to fish and how to sharpen knives safely. When I was younger, his strange behavior just felt normal. Everything changed the day he saw the thing in the woods. I still remember how terrified he looked when he came running back to the house. He had been near the edge of the property putting up another sign when he noticed someone or something standing behind a large oak tree. According to him, it was only a few feet away, close enough that he should have heard it breathing or moving. But it made no sound at all. The front door slammed open so hard it nearly cracked the wall. Dad rushed inside, grabbed his rifle, then sprinted back outside before any of us could even ask what happened. A few seconds later, gunshots exploded through the forest. My mother looked out the window while my little brother started crying upstairs. I just stood frozen in the kitchen listening to the echo of bullets bouncing through the trees. When Dad finally returned, he looked pale and shaken. His hands were trembling so badly he almost dropped the rifle. During dinner, he explained what he saw. Most of the creature's body had been hidden behind the oak tree, but its face was enough to terrify him. It was completely hairless except for long, thick eyelashes hanging over huge, unblinking eyes. He said each eye was almost the size of a fist. Its skin was paper white, stretched tightly across a long, narrow face. The fingers wrapped around the tree were impossibly long and thin, bending around the bark like spider legs. But the worst part wasn't the face. It was the height. The creature's head wasn't standing at eye level. Its face was near the top of the tree, almost touching the leaves. Dad said when he rubbed his eyes to make sure he wasn't imagining things, the creature smiled at him. Not a human smile, more like the expression animals make before attacking. He compared it to chimpanzees he had seen in documentaries. The teeth were small and flat like baby teeth, packed tightly together in pink swollen gums, and the entire time, it never blinked once. Dad stayed awake all night after that. He walked around the house with his rifle clutched tightly in his hands, while my mother watched nervously through the windows. The next morning, we found him sitting on the porch, exhausted, barely awake. My mother finally convinced him to show her where he saw the thing. They both left together, carrying rifles. They came back less than 15 minutes later, looking even worse than before. This time, they had both seen it. According to my mother, the creature wasn't hiding anymore. It stood completely exposed between the trees with that same horrible smile stretched across its face. Dad emptied nearly half his ammunition into it before Mom stopped him from wasting the rest. The bullets punched holes clean through the creature's body, but there was no blood, no scream, no reaction at all. The thing simply stared at them while chunks of flesh tore away from its chest and shoulders. Then it slowly walked backward into the forest without ever turning around or breaking eye contact. Like it wasn't injured, like it didn't care. After that day, my brother and I weren't allowed outside anymore. Mom handled supplies inside the house while Dad focused entirely on protecting the property. As for my brother and me, Mom told us our only responsibility was not dying. Those were her exact words. Dad became even more paranoid over the next week. Every trip outside gave him another story about the creature. One afternoon, he returned from town and saw it standing beside the house, staring into one of the second-floor windows. When it noticed him, it stepped away using long, unnatural strides and disappeared into the woods without making a sound. That same evening, Dad started building a massive fence around the house. He worked non-stop for days, dragging giant wooden planks across the property. By the time he finished, the fence towered almost as high as the chimney itself. It completely surrounded the house with no openings, except for a locked front gate. My mother didn't argue with him anymore. By then, she looked just as terrified as he did. Neither of them really slept. Dad constantly tapped his foot at the dinner table while glancing toward the windows every few seconds. At night, he circled the house carrying his rifle while Mom checked every door and window repeatedly. The fear inside that house grew heavier every day. Then Monday came. It was close to midnight when my mother suddenly screamed from the living room. The sound jolted everyone awake instantly. Dad grabbed his rifle while my brother and I ran downstairs. Mom stood frozen beside the window, staring upward at the top of the fence. Her face looked completely drained of color. The creature's face was peeking over the fence. Smiling, Dad immediately opened fire. The gunshots were deafening inside the yard. Flash after flash lit up the darkness while my mother screamed for us to barricade the doors. We shoved couches, tables, and chairs against every entrance. The windows had already been boarded shut days earlier. Within minutes, the entire house felt sealed like a bunker. Outside, gunfire continued nonstop. 1 shot, 2 shots, 3, then more and more until the sounds blended together. My little brother peeked through a tiny gap in one of the boards covering the window. A second later, he collapsed into hysterical screaming. It grabbed him, he kept repeating between sobs. It grabbed him by the neck. Slow at first, then louder. We all froze. The chimney. We had forgotten the chimney. Before any of us could react, a long, pale arm reached down from the fireplace and wrapped around my mother's throat. It happened so fast my brain couldn't understand what I was seeing. The creature lifted her off the ground with one hand like she weighed nothing. Her feet scraped desperately against the floor, while her neck began stretching unnaturally longer. Then the thing yanked her upward, hard. Her body shot toward the chimney so quickly she became a blur. But her neck kept stretching. Longer, longer. I chased after her, screaming and trying to grab her legs, but I was too small, too slow. Within seconds, she disappeared completely into the darkness above us. The only sounds left were my brother's crying and the echo of movement inside the chimney. Then the creature's face slowly appeared from the darkness. One last time, it smiled and winked before disappearing outside again. I stood there shaking so badly I thought I might throw up. Goosebumps covered my entire body while my brother cried beside me for the rest of the night. Neither of us slept. When morning finally came, I held the fireplace poker tightly in my hands, while my little brother leaned against my shoulder, exhausted from crying. Eventually, we decided to go outside. Moving the barricade took forever because of how much furniture we had stacked against the door. Once we finally pushed everything aside, we grabbed shovels from the closet and started digging beneath part of the fence where the ground looked loose enough to move. By the time we crawled outside, the sun was already rising. That's when we found our parents. They were lying side by side in the grass, perfectly still. Their eyes were closed peacefully like they were sleeping, but their necks were stretched across the yard, long enough to reach the size of a car. I still have nightmares about it. Dad's phone was still in his jacket pocket. My hands shook while dialing 911, but eventually someone answered. Police and paramedics arrived hours later. Nobody believed our story. How could they? 2 children living isolated in the woods beside the bodies of their dead parents sounded insane enough already. Talking about a smiling creature only made it worse. My brother and I were sent to live with one of our aunts in another state. She owned dozens of cats and barely spoke to us unless necessary. Her house smelled like dust and litter boxes all the time. But at least it was safe. Or at least we thought it was. Years passed after that. My brother never recovered properly from what happened. After high school, he got involved with drugs, crime, and almost every bad decision imaginable. Eventually, he ended up in rehab, where I still visit him occasionally. Strangely enough, our parents survived. That was the part nobody could explain. They were discovered alive hours after the police arrived, barely conscious near the woods. Doctors managed to save them somehow, though their bodies were permanently damaged. I never saw them again in person after that night. They live in some kind of medical facility now. We only communicate through phone calls and text messages. I think they're too ashamed or too terrified to let anyone see what they've become. As for me, I managed to build a normal life somehow. I became an accountant, boring but stable. I bought a house in the suburbs, married an eccentric woman I loved deeply, and eventually had 2 children of my own. For years, I convinced myself the creature was gone forever, that maybe it had stayed behind in those woods. Maybe it only belonged there. I almost believed that. Then 2 weeks ago, I was washing dishes late at night when I noticed movement outside the kitchen window. At first, I thought it was my reflection. Then I looked closer. The creature stood inches away from the glass, still pale, still hairless, still smiling with those tiny baby teeth. Its huge eyes stared directly at me without blinking. I dropped a plate onto the floor. My wife came running into the kitchen asking what happened, but by the time she reached the window, the creature had stepped back toward the darkness near the trees. Still watching, always watching. Since then, it has appeared every single night. Sometimes outside the bedroom window, sometimes beside the driveway, sometimes standing near my children's rooms. It never attacks, never speaks, never even moves much. It just stares into the house with that horrible smile stretched across its face. My wife thinks we should call the police, but I already know it won't matter, because the worst part isn't what the creature does. It's what it wants. It waits. Patiently, like it knows eventually we'll stop sleeping, stop thinking clearly, stop feeling safe. And lately, every night when I check the windows before bed, I swear the thing looks a little closer than before. A little taller, a little happier. Right now, while I'm writing this, my kitchen curtains are closed, but I can still feel it standing out there, watching, smiling, waiting for one of us to look outside again. Story 6. Growing up, my family never stayed in one place for very long. My father's work constantly moved us from state to state, town to town, house to house. Just when I would start getting comfortable somewhere, we'd pack everything into boxes again and leave. I got used to being the new kid at school. I got used to awkward introductions, temporary friendships, and painful goodbyes. As a child, I hated it. Every time we moved, it felt like I lost a piece of myself. Friends disappeared. Favorite places became memories. Entire parts of my childhood faded because we never stayed anywhere long enough for roots to grow. But out of all the places we lived, there's only one house I remember perfectly. Even now, at 80 years old, I can still picture every detail of it. That house stood on the outskirts of New Vineyard, Maine. It was huge compared to the three of us living there. Too huge, honestly. Most of the rooms sat untouched, filled with old furniture covered in dust sheets and strange antique decorations that looked older than the town itself. It didn't feel abandoned exactly. It felt left behind, like whoever lived there before us had fled in a hurry and never returned. People around town talked about the place constantly. According to them, the house was haunted because of the old cemetery hidden deep in the woods behind it. There was a narrow deer trail leading straight to it. The locals loved telling stories about ghosts wandering near the property at night. But even as a child, I never believed in things like that. I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in monsters. I didn't even believe in Santa Claus. So when we moved into that house, I ignored the rumors completely and claimed one of the upstairs bedrooms for myself without a second thought. Most of my childhood memories are blurry now. Birthdays blend together. School years disappeared into fog. Even the trips we took across the country feel more like dreams than real memories. But what happened in that house stayed with me forever. Because that's where I met Mr. Widemouth. I was 11 years old when I got sick. It wasn't anything life-threatening, but it was bad enough to keep me stuck in bed for several days. The timing couldn't have been worse because I had finally started settling into my new school and making friends. My mother spent most of those days checking on me. She brought me soup, juice boxes, medicine, and blankets while my father worked downstairs. I met him during one of those quiet afternoons. At first, I thought he was a toy sitting near my closet. Then he moved. He was small and furry with brownish-gray fur covering his body. His eyes glowed orange in the dim room, almost like tiny flashlights. But the thing I noticed most was his mouth. It was enormous, far too large for his face. His lips stretched unnaturally wide, exposing rows of sharp, triangular teeth. It looked like he physically couldn't close his mouth all the way. "Who are you?" I asked nervously. He smiled even wider. "I'm Mr. Widemouth," he said cheerfully. His voice sounded strangely smooth, almost rehearsed. "Where did you come from?" I was sent to be your personal fairy guide. He said it so casually that I almost laughed. My fairy guide? That's right, he replied proudly. I'm here to help you feel better. I didn't trust him immediately. Honestly, the thing looked creepy. He seemed to notice my hesitation because his glowing eyes brightened slightly. Don't worry, he said. I know every child in the world. I travel everywhere. Someday, I'll even take you to my world. But only when you're ready. Before I could ask what he meant, my mother entered the room carrying soup. The second she opened the door, Mr. Widemouth vanished into the darkness of my closet. Who were you talking to? She asked. Myself, I lied. Quickly after she left, Mr. Widemouth crawled back out looking relieved. Your parents can't know about me, he whispered. If they do, we can't be friends anymore. Friend, the word felt strange, but over the next few days he visited constantly, and somehow I started liking him. On the second day, he brought toys. Not normal toys either. Perfect toys. Brand new action figures. Little cars. Plastic dinosaurs. Even an old blue toy truck with one missing wheel that somehow became my favorite. We spent hours playing games together. We pretended to be train conductors. We stomped around the room acting like dinosaurs. We recreated scenes from movies using the action figures. Whenever we got too loud, Mr. Widemouth would hide beneath the bed until my mother left the room again. Looking back now, that should have terrified me. But back then, I was lonely, and he made me feel less alone. Sometimes at night, I even let him sit beside my bed while I slept. That's when I noticed something strange. He drooled constantly. Thin strings of saliva hung from his teeth whenever he stared at me too long. During those moments, his behavior changed slightly. He became more excited, more twitchy, almost hungry. On the third night, I had my first nightmare. A pale boy stood beside my bed, staring down at me. His skin was gray and lifeless. His eyes looked cloudy and dead. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, he pointed toward my closet. The closet door slowly creaked open. Two glowing orange eyes stared back at me from inside the darkness. Sharp claws scraped softly against the wood. I woke up gasping. Mr. Widemouth immediately appeared beside me. Did you have a nightmare? He asked softly. I nodded. Smiling gently, he tucked my blanket around me and promised to protect me while I slept. At the time, his words comforted me. Now they make me sick. The next day, things became stranger. My parents were downstairs while Mr. Widemouth brought me into the bathroom. I have a surprise, he said excitedly. He climbed onto the sink and opened the medicine cabinet. Inside was a bottle of pills. These are yummy pills, he said happily. He poured several into his hand and held them out toward me. Eat them. I stared at him nervously. Won't I get sick? They'll take you to my world. His eyes glowed brightly while drool dripped from his mouth onto the sink. I think you're ready now. For a moment, I almost listened. That's the terrifying part. As a child, you trust things too easily. Especially things pretending to care about you. But something deep inside me felt wrong. I slowly backed away. I can't. For the rest of that day, he barely spoke. That's when I started realizing he wasn't what he pretended to be. A few days later, he led me outside toward the road near our house. Lie down here, he said casually. What? No. It'll be safe, he promised. My parents said never to play in the road. His smile faded slightly. Your parents are very cautious. There was anger hiding beneath his voice now. I refused again. Mr. Widemouth growled softly before disappearing into the woods. That night, another nightmare came. This time, it was a little girl standing beside my bed. She cried endlessly while staring at me with hollow black eyes. Just like the boy before her, she tried desperately to speak, but no sound came out. Then she opened her mouth unnaturally wide, wider, wider, until it looked almost identical to Mr. Widemouth's grin. The closet door opened again behind her, and suddenly she was dragged backward into the darkness. I woke up screaming. Mr. Widemouth stood beside my bed, smiling. Before, his smile seemed friendly. Now it looked horrifying. I pulled the blanket over my head while one terrible thought echoed inside my mind. How long had he been standing there watching me sleep? Eventually, I tried telling my parents about him. They laughed. They thought I had created an imaginary friend because I was lonely after moving again. Mr. Widemouth didn't like that. That night, I found my toys destroyed. My favorite blue truck had been slashed apart, stuffing spilled across the floor from other toys. I gave those to you, Mr. Widemouth whispered angrily. I can take them away too. That was when I truly became afraid of him. The nightmares kept coming every single night. The ghost boy and girl appeared together now. This time they drew pictures on the floor. Pictures of a creature with glowing eyes and a giant mouth leading children away into darkness. Mr. Widemouth, they were trying to warn me. The thing living in my room wasn't my friend. It was a monster. Soon after that, my parents announced we were moving again because of my father's job. For the first time in my life, hearing that news made me happy. We were finally leaving. Mr. Widemouth somehow seemed to know. He became unusually affectionate afterward, fixing the toys he destroyed and bringing me new ones. One afternoon, he led me down the deer trail behind the house. Deep in the woods sat the old cemetery people always talked about. Mr. Widemouth smiled proudly. Down there is the entrance to my world, he said. His mouth watered heavily. There's candy there, popcorn, unicorns, so many children to play with. I stayed silent. I knew the truth now. Whatever his world was, nobody came back from it. Still, I pretended everything was normal because I was terrified of angering him before we left. Finally, moving day arrived. My parents packed the car while I gathered the last of my things. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I walked down the deer trail one final time. The cemetery looked ancient. Every gravestone belonged to a child. Every single one. A horrible feeling settled in my stomach. Then I noticed an open grave nearby. It was freshly dug. I stepped closer carefully. Suddenly, something slammed into my legs from behind. I nearly fell into the grave. Spinning around, I saw Mr. Widemouth staring at me. But this time, there was no pretending anymore. His eyes burned with hunger. Saliva poured from his mouth while he licked his teeth slowly. Guess I waited too long, he whispered. Before I could move, he lunged at me. His teeth sank deep into my ankle. I screamed. The pain was unbearable. I kicked and clawed desperately while he dragged me toward the open grave. I genuinely thought I was about to die there. Then suddenly, hands, pale, ghostly hands burst from the ground around us. Dozens of them. The ghost children. They grabbed Mr. Widemouth and pulled him backward. He shrieked violently while clawing at the dirt, trying to reach me. The hands dragged him into the open grave. Then the earth collapsed inward, burying him completely. The woods went silent. I limped back toward the house, bleeding heavily while my parents panicked at the sight of me. I never told them the truth. How could I? Who would believe me? We moved away from Maine shortly after that. I grew older, graduated school, started a family, had children, and eventually grandchildren. Most of my life has been normal since then. Mostly, but sometimes late at night, I still think about that house. I still think about the glowing orange eyes watching me from the closet. And sometimes, when my grandchildren ask me to tell stories about my childhood, I catch myself glancing toward dark corners of the room before answering. Because even after all these years, a small part of me still wonders if Mr. Widemouth ever truly died. Story 7. Belief is a heavy thing. Once something settles deep enough into your mind, it becomes part of you. It wraps around your thoughts, like roots around stone. People think logic can break belief apart, but they are wrong. When something lives in your bones long enough, it stops feeling like belief and starts feeling like truth. That is how it is with the gnome. I know how insane that sounds. Even writing the sentence makes me feel embarrassed for a moment. A grown woman terrified of a lawn gnome. If someone else told me this story years ago, I probably would have laughed too. But the problem is real. The gnome lives in my house. Not all the time, not openly. It moves quickly, always just outside clear vision. Sometimes I catch a blur from the corner of my eye. Sometimes I hear tiny footsteps somewhere upstairs. Sometimes I find it standing perfectly still among ordinary objects, as if it has always belonged there. And whenever something disappears, I know it was him. The doctors say I suffer from paranoia and dissociation. They say the gnome is a symbol my brain created to explain forgetfulness and stress. They say I move and break things myself, then blame a hallucination because my mind cannot handle reality properly anymore. But they do not live here. They never see what I see. They never wake up to find things missing from impossible places. It started small, little things at first. Harmless things, TV remotes, hairbrushes, socks, keys. I would search the house for hours only for the missing object to appear somewhere ridiculous later, places I knew for a fact I had already checked. One evening I found the television remote outside in the bushes near the porch. Another time my makeup bag disappeared for 3 days before turning up inside the oven. Not near the oven. Inside it, things like that slowly wear down your sanity. At first, my husband thought it was funny. He said I was distracted all the time. Said I misplaced things because I was always rushing around. Then more important things started disappearing. His wallet, car keys, bills, jewelry. And suddenly it was not funny anymore. The worst part is the waiting, never knowing what the gnome will steal next. You start checking your pockets every few minutes. You start counting things in your head. You stop trusting yourself. And then, one day, you finally see him. The first clear sighting happened late at night. I woke up thirsty around 2 in the morning and went downstairs into the kitchen. The only light came from the microwave clock glowing green in the dark. That is when I noticed something sitting on the counter. A little porcelain gnome. It had a red puckered face and tiny lips pushed forward like it wanted to kiss someone. Its hands rested inside oversized overall pockets, and it wore a dusty little cowboy hat tilted crookedly on its head. At first I thought maybe it belonged to a neighbor or one of the kids brought it home from school. Then the gnome blinked. Not dramatically, just once. Slowly. I froze so hard I nearly dropped my glass. The thing smiled at me. Then it moved. Not like a person moves. It jerked suddenly across the counter so fast my brain barely processed it. 1 second it sat near the coffee maker. The next it vanished behind the fruit bowl. When I rushed forward to look, it was gone. But my missing car keys sat exactly where the gnome had been. I did not sleep that night. Over the following months, I saw him more and more often. Sometimes he wore different clothes, sometimes suspenders. Once I found a version of him dressed like a fisherman holding a tiny porcelain lantern. Every gnome looked slightly different, but I always knew it was him. Same eyes, same mocking smile, same feeling of being watched. I started smashing them whenever I found them. I would grab a hammer or throw them against the wall, desperate to prove they were real. Every time they shattered into ordinary porcelain pieces. And every time my family looked at me like I had finally lost my mind. My husband became exhausted by me, At first, he tried being patient. He listened to my explanations. He helped search for missing items. But eventually, frustration replaced concern, especially after the incident with his suit. He had an important meeting coming up, and I picked up his favorite suit from the dry cleaner that afternoon. I remembered hanging it inside the closet. The next morning, it was gone. Completely gone. We searched every room in the house. Nothing. He accused me of forgetting it somewhere. I swore I had brought it home. 2 weeks later, we found the suit folded neatly inside a storage box in the attic beneath old Christmas decorations. I had checked that box personally 3 times before. My husband said I probably overlooked it. I knew I had not. The gnome had returned it when he felt like it. That became his game. Taking things, returning them, watching us suffer. My son once lost a school uniform shirt the morning of an important event. We tore apart the house searching for it. My son cried because he thought he would get in trouble at school. 3 days later, the shirt appeared hanging perfectly inside the laundry room beside freshly washed towels. No one believed me when I said the gnome brought it back. They just looked tired. The thing that finally broke me was my grandmother's ring. Mama gave it to me before she died. A giant black pearl between 2 diamonds. Pawpaw had bought it for her years ago, and it was one of the few family heirlooms we had left. I wore it constantly. One night after dinner, I noticed it was gone. I panicked immediately. I searched everywhere. Couch cushions, bathroom sink, car seats, laundry baskets, trash cans, nothing. I cried for days over that ring. Months later, I found it sitting at the bottom of my underwear drawer. Not hidden, not tucked away, just sitting there openly. I use that drawer every single day. There is no possible way I missed the giant black pearl ring for months. But according to everyone else, that is exactly what happened. The gnome became bolder after that. He started stealing larger things. Gasoline from the cars, entire bags of groceries. My vape vanished one evening while it sat directly beside me on the couch. I looked away for maybe 10 seconds. Gone. Never returned. I became obsessed with watching for him. Sometimes I would catch movement in mirrors, tiny shadows running past doorways, soft scraping sounds inside walls. The house felt infected. One afternoon, important paperwork disappeared from my husband's desk. Insurance documents and bill information we desperately needed. That was the first time I spoke directly to the gnome. I stood in our bedroom and demanded he return the papers. I remember whispering angrily because I did not want my family hearing me talk to something they believed was imaginary. Then I saw him. He stood near the nightstand wearing blue overalls and a tiny gardening hat. Smiling, the paperwork sat beside him. I snatched the papers immediately. At that exact moment, my husband walked into the room. To him, I was standing there clutching papers in one hand and a decorative porcelain gnome in the other. He looked exhausted, not angry anymore, just defeated. He told me he was tired of me touching his things and walked downstairs. The moment he left, I looked back toward the nightstand. The gnome was still there, laughing, actually laughing. His mouth hung open unnaturally wide while tiny wheezing sounds came from inside him. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the thing and carried it outside. Then I smashed it with a sledgehammer. Again, again, again. Porcelain exploded across the driveway while I screamed at it to leave us alone. My husband watched from the porch in silence. To him, I was having a violent breakdown while destroying a lawn decoration. That night, he called a doctor. The appointment felt humiliating. A young psychiatrist asked me endless questions while typing notes into a computer. He nodded constantly in that fake understanding way doctors do when they already made up their minds before you even sat down. By the end, he handed me multiple prescriptions and explained my diagnosis carefully. Paranoia, obsessive behavior. Possible psychosis. My husband picked up the medication immediately. The pills changed everything. Or maybe they changed me. They made my thoughts heavy and slow. I spent hours lying on the couch staring blankly at television shows I'd barely understood. It became difficult to care about anything. That was the worst part. Not fear, not confusion, the numbness. But even through the medication haze, I still saw the gnome. He stood in corners watching me. Sometimes he crawled quickly beneath furniture when I looked directly at him. Sometimes I woke up and found him sitting on my chest while I slept. My husband blamed me every time something vanished, because now he truly believed I was moving things without remembering. And maybe part of me started wondering if he was right, until the hospital. Eventually, the doctors decided I needed psychiatric evaluation. I still remember my husband kissing my forehead before leaving me there. He had tears in his eyes. He kept saying this was for the best. I wanted to tell him I was not crazy. Instead, I just watched him leave. The psych ward felt colder than normal hospitals. The lights buzzed constantly. Every hallway smelled faintly of bleach and old socks. At first, I hated being there. Then I noticed the gnome sitting beside the sink in my room, smiling, watching me brush my teeth. He had followed me. That was when true fear settled inside me. Because if he could come there, then nowhere was safe. Things began disappearing in the ward, too. Toothpaste, soap, books. Patients accused each other constantly. The staff blamed confusion and theft between residents. But I knew better. The gnome loved chaos. He fed on frustration. I tried ignoring him at first, because I realized talking about him only made the doctors think I was getting worse. But he became crueler. My husband mailed approved personal items to comfort me during my stay. Clothes, letters, photos of the children. Almost all of it disappeared. I would beg the nurses for replacements until they became irritated with me. Sometimes the gnome returned things just to mock me. One morning, I found all my missing toiletries arranged neatly on my bed beside a tiny porcelain flower. Another time, my husband's photograph appeared floating inside the toilet bowl. The gnome wanted me to know he controlled everything. After a while, strange things started happening among the other patients, too. Objects vanished constantly. People fought over stolen belongings. One woman accused another patient of stealing shoes that later turned up inside a locked supply closet. A man lost his wedding ring for 2 weeks before finding it beneath his mattress. Everyone became paranoid, suspicious. Angry, the ward slowly turned chaotic. The staff blamed stress among patients, but I would see the gnome wandering through the hallways at night, carrying little stolen objects in his tiny porcelain hands. Watching, smiling, waiting. People think madness is loud. It is not. Madness is quiet acceptance. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince anyone the gnome was real. There was no point. The doctors thought I was sick. My husband thought I was manipulative. And maybe I was tired of fighting. So I accepted the gnome. I even gave him a name, Josh. Sometimes Josh is cruel. Sometimes he steals things just to watch people suffer. But sometimes he brings things back. Sometimes he sits quietly near my bed at night like a strange little guardian. And honestly, those are the moments that scare me most. Because I am starting to think he likes me. Yesterday, one of the nurses accused another patient of stealing medication from the cart. Everyone argued for nearly an hour. Last night, when the hallway finally became quiet, I woke up and found the missing medication lined up carefully beside my pillow. Josh sat beside them, swinging his tiny legs, smiling at me. This morning, the nurse asked if I knew anything about the missing pills. I told her no, because after all this time, I finally understand something important. The gnome only steals from people who notice him. And lately, I think he wants me all to himself. Story 8. I'll start by saying this was not one of those strange stories where I bought a pet from the back of some dirty van. There was no old man in a long coat, no creepy warning, no rule about keeping her away from water or sunlight. Nothing like that happened. I bought her from a normal pet store. That's probably the part that bothers me the most. Now, everything about it was ordinary. I walked in one afternoon because I had been thinking about getting a snake for months. I had watched videos, read care guides, and convinced myself I was ready. I wanted something calm, something quiet, something that didn't need constant attention the way a dog or cat would. She was in a glass tank with 2 other snakes when I first saw her. All 3 of them were tangled together on the darker side of the enclosure, half hidden under a piece of fake bark. She was an albino python, pale and beautiful in a strange way, with soft white scales and faint yellow markings along her body. She was about 1.5 feet long, not tiny, but not huge either. The employee reached into the tank carefully and pulled her out. She didn't fight, she didn't hiss, she didn't even seem bothered. He placed her around my arm, and she simply curled there like she had already decided I was furniture. "She's relaxed," he said. "Looks like she's falling asleep." I believed him. I named her Bella before I even left the store. When I got her home, she acted exactly the same. Quiet, still, almost gentle. I set up her tank as best as I could and placed her inside. She slowly moved to the shadowed corner, coiled herself tightly, and stayed there. I left water for her and placed a dead mouse in the tank, since that was what I had been told to feed her. By then, it was late, so I turned off the lights and went to bed. The next morning, Bella was still in the exact same corner. The mouse was untouched. At first, I didn't worry. I assumed the pet store had already fed her recently. I removed the mouse and left her alone. A few days later, I tried again. Same result. The mouse stayed exactly where I put it. Bella didn't even seem interested. A few days after that, I tried one more time. Nothing changed. She stayed in her corner like a decoration. 2 weeks passed, and she still hadn't eaten. That was when I started getting nervous. I picked up my phone to call the pet store. But before I dialed, a thought came to me. Maybe she didn't want dead mice. I knew live feeding was generally not recommended. I had read that mice can fight back and injure snakes. But I was desperate, and Bella didn't look weak yet. She was just still. Too still. I had a few live mice already, so I decided to try. I told myself I would watch carefully. If the mouse attacked her, I'd pull it out immediately. The moment I approached the tank with the mouse, Bella moved. That alone surprised me. She lifted her head from the corner and stared through the glass, not only at the mouse, but at me too. Her body slid slowly from the shadows, smooth and silent. I opened the lid and placed the mouse in the opposite corner. The mouse froze at first, nose twitching, little ears flicking at every sound. Bella moved behind a fake branch, almost like she was hiding. Then she struck, but not the way a python should. Her mouth opened wide, and something black shot from deep inside her throat. It wasn't venom like in movies. It was thicker than that. Dark, glossy, almost like oil or bile. It hit the mouse before it could run. The sound it made still turns my stomach. The mouse squealed, but the sound came out wet and bubbling. The black liquid spread across its fur, and almost instantly the body started to foam. The foam turned from white to pink, then red. The mouse twitched violently while its skin seemed to soften and collapse. Even with the lid closed, I smelled it. Sour milk, burnt hair, rotten meat. All mixed together, I gagged and stumbled backward, covering my nose with my hand. My eyes watered. The smell seemed to crawl into my throat and lungs. I knew enough about pythons to know that this was not normal. Pythons are not venomous. They do not spit black acid at their food. They do not melt mice into bubbling flesh. I left the apartment almost immediately and drove back to the pet store. The owner didn't believe me at first. He gave me that polite smile people use when they think you're exaggerating. When I explained again, he frowned and said he had never heard of anything like that. Then he told me they had not bred Bella themselves. They had bought her and her siblings from someone else. Maybe she's some kind of strange crossbreed, he said. That was his answer. A strange crossbreed. I asked if I could return her. He shrugged and told me I had already paid for her, but he also didn't exactly refuse. He just made it clear he didn't want the problem back. I left with several live mice. When I got home, the first mouse was no longer a mouse. It was a pulsing pile of pink and gray tissue in the corner of the tank. Bella had just started eating it. The smell had faded, but not completely. It had soaked into the apartment somehow. The carpet, the curtains, the walls. Everything smelled faintly wrong. I dropped another live mouse into the tank and shut the door behind me. That became the routine. At first, I hated it. The sound, the smell, the sight of those small bodies melting into soft piles before Bella swallowed them. But people can get used to almost anything. Soon, I was feeding her every day, sometimes twice a day. I knew that was too much. A snake her size was supposed to eat around once a week, but Bella was always hungry. Every time I passed her tank, she lifted her head and watched me. At some point, the smell stopped bothering me, or maybe I just stopped noticing it. After a while, liquefied mouse became a normal part of my day. Looking back, there were things I should have noticed sooner. For example, Bella never left waste behind. No droppings, no mess, only the dried blood splatter from whatever she had eaten. Within a month, she doubled in size. Soon after that, she became too big for her original tank. I went back to the pet store and bought the largest enclosure they had. It was expensive, much more expensive than I wanted, but I didn't have a choice. Bella was growing fast, and her old tank looked cruelly small by then. I moved her new enclosure onto the floor because it was too large for any shelf. It took up an annoying amount of space in my living room. Her food was already draining my money, and now the new tank made it worse. I sold the old one back to the store after cleaning it as thoroughly as possible. It took nearly an hour to scrub the dried mouse remains from the glass. Around that time, I noticed the first real change in her body. I used to take Bella out sometimes. She was calm when she wasn't hunting, and I liked letting her coil around my arm while I watched TV. She never bit me, never hissed. One evening, as she moved across my hand, I felt something brush against my skin. At first, I thought it was dust or a loose fiber. Then I looked closer. Tiny hairs had grown around her nostrils. They were almost invisible at first, thin and white, blending into her pale scales. A week later, they were longer and thicker, about a quarter inch. They looked wrong, not like whiskers exactly, but close enough that my brain didn't like seeing them on a snake. I told myself maybe it was some weird mutation. I kept telling myself things like that. Bella also started disappearing whenever I let her out. She would slide behind the sofa or under furniture. I always kept the living room door closed, so I didn't panic. But sometimes I found little bubbling piles of half-digested flesh in corners of the room. Once, I found one in the hallway. Another time, near the kitchen. I never figured out what she had caught. A month later, Bella was almost 6 feet long. Her body was thicker than my forearm, all muscle and bone. She didn't feel like a pet anymore when I held her. She felt like something heavy and powerful, pretending to be calm. One night, I fed her before going out to meet my friend Evelyn. We had drinks at a bar until closing, then came back to my place for a few more. I was drunk enough to feel relaxed, but not drunk enough to forget Bella was in the living room. When Evelyn saw her, I expected the usual reaction. Fear, disgust, maybe nervous laughter. Instead, she was fascinated. "She's beautiful," Evelyn said, stepping closer to the tank. "Can I hold her?" I should have said no, But Bella had never attacked a person before. She was always quiet unless there was prey involved. I figured it would be fine. By then, she was heavy, so I lifted her carefully and draped part of her body across Evelyn's shoulders, guiding the rest down her arm. Bella moved slowly, as she always did, sliding across Evelyn's skin. Evelyn laughed. "She's warm," she said. "I thought snakes were supposed to be cold." I looked at Bella. She was warm. Too warm. Before I could think too much about it, Bella had reached Evelyn's hand. Then she opened her mouth and took Evelyn's thumb between her jaws. Evelyn's smile disappeared. Is she supposed to do that? I stared, confused. She's never done that before. "She's not biting," Evelyn said, though her voice had gone shaky. "But I don't like it." I stepped forward to remove Bella. Then Bella gagged. A thick black fluid began leaking from her mouth around Evelyn's thumb. Evelyn gasped. "Get her off me." I grabbed Bella's body and tried to unwind her, but she tightened instantly. Her muscles turned hard as steel. She wrapped around Evelyn's arm, squeezing tighter and tighter. Evelyn started crying. "Please get her off." The black liquid foamed around her thumb. Her skin started hissing. I tried prying Bella's mouth open with my fingers, but the liquid touched me. The pain was immediate and blinding, like white-hot metal pressed into my skin. I screamed and pulled back, shaking my hand. Evelyn screamed louder. Bella kept sliding her mouth farther over the hand. The thumb vanished first, then part of the palm. Her body squeezed Evelyn's arm so hard the skin turned red, then purple, then blue. Evelyn pulled at Bella with her free hand, but it did nothing. Then I heard a crack. Not a small crack. A deep, wet snap. Evelyn's arm bent the wrong way at the elbow. A sharp white piece of bone pushed through the skin. Bella seemed startled by the sudden movement. Her grip loosened for just a second. That second saved Evelyn's life. I grabbed Bella with both hands and yanked as hard as I could. She tore free from Evelyn's hand and landed in the corner of the room in a coiled pile. But she recovered fast. Too fast. She lunged again. I grabbed Evelyn and pulled her through the living room doorway, slamming the door behind us. Evelyn collapsed against the wall, sobbing, holding her broken arm. Her hand was bubbling. The flesh around the missing thumb hissed and smoked. "Hold the door," I shouted. She pressed her good shoulder against it while I ran to the kitchen. Behind the door came a heavy thud, then another. Evelyn screamed every time Bella hit it. I came back with a chair and tried to wedge it under the handle, but just as Evelyn moved away, the door slammed open a few inches. I threw my shoulder against it and forced it shut. But Bella's tail shot through the gap. I kicked the door with everything I had, trapping the tip of her tail. From the other side came a strange shriek, not like a snake, more like air escaping something wet and alive. Bella pulled hard. The tail stretched, then tore slowly with a dry ripping sound. The door finally closed. 2 inches of Bella's tail dropped onto the floor beside us. It didn't stop moving. It curled and twisted like a worm. Dark purple fluid oozed from the severed end. Then something pale began pushing out of the stump. It looked like the beginning of a thumb. I kicked it across the hall, and it hit the wall with a wet splat. I wedged the chair under the door and didn't wait. We got into my car, and I drove to the nearest hospital. Evelyn passed out before we arrived. I carried her into the ER, shouting for help. Nurses rushed her away, and I was left sitting alone in the waiting room, hands shaking, clothes stained, fingers burned. Nobody asked enough questions at first. Maybe they thought it was an animal attack. Maybe they thought I was too hysterical to explain. Hours passed. I must have fallen asleep in the chair because a nurse woke me later and led me down a quiet hallway into a hospital room. Evelyn was awake, barely. She looked terrible. Her skin was pale, Her eyes were sunken. Her broken arm was wrapped in a large cast suspended near her chest. Her hand was covered in thick gauze. The nurse told me they had treated the fracture as best they could. Her elbow had been badly broken, and recovery would take months. Her thumb was gone. The burns were too deep. Fourth-degree chemical damage, they said. They had to amputate. She was on morphine, but I could tell from her face that it wasn't enough. I tried to smile at her. It failed immediately. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." Evelyn looked at me with tired eyes. Then she gave a weak smile. "I've had worse dates." I laughed once, but it came out broken. She closed her eyes again soon after that. I stayed beside her bed, listening to the slow beep of the monitor. I knew I had to go home eventually, but I couldn't. Best case, Bella was still locked in the living room. Worst case, she had escaped. Maybe into the house. Maybe outside. Maybe anywhere. And if she found something else to eat, I didn't know what would happen. I thought about calling animal control. Then I imagined trying to explain that my albino python had melted my friend's thumb off and was growing human-looking parts from its severed tail. So I stayed at the hospital. Call me a coward if you want. I don't care. The next morning, the doctors gave me more news. Evelyn still hadn't woken properly. Her heart rate had been climbing for hours. They weren't sure why. They mentioned infection. They mentioned shock. Then one of them mentioned possible venom. I almost laughed. Bella wasn't supposed to have venom. Bella wasn't supposed to spit black acid. Bella wasn't supposed to grow this fast. None of this was supposed to happen. The police are supposed to come talk to me tonight. I don't know what I'm going to tell them. There is no version of the truth that sounds sane. And I still haven't gone home. But about 20 minutes ago, my phone buzzed. It was a motion alert from the small camera in my living room. I forgot I even had it. For a while, I just stared at the notification, unable to open it. Then I did. The video was only 12 seconds long. The living room door was broken open. The tank was shattered. Bella was gone. At first, the room looked empty. Then something moved near the hallway. A pale shape dragged itself across the floor, much larger than Bella had been last night. It had no tail, but near the back of its body, something small and pale dragged behind it. Not a tail, a hand. And just before the video ended, Bella lifted her head toward the camera. Her mouth opened, and in the darkness behind her teeth, something inside whispered Evelyn's voice. "Going back to sleep?"